All right, so welcome. I am Kristen Crockett. I'm a leadership and executive coach and facilitator, and I'm really here to help leaders and teams expand and lead. And I do that through self-awareness, authentic leadership, as well as really helping you with your confidence. So today we are talking about what it's like to be a hard worker. So if you are tuning in, you probably at one point have define yourself as a hard worker. So whether you are watching us live or on the replay, hard work has been a part of our society forever. So let's kind of go back. We want to go back and we want to really talk about where that all came from. And so if you are joining us live, I'd love for you to, or on the replay, I'd love for you to actually put a comment of where you are joining us from, what city or what country you are joining us from. So let's get into it. So when you are younger, I know for me and probably for you, we always hear about just putting our heads down and just working, right? So putting your head down and just working, right? So that is ultimately what happens in the workplace, is that we end up getting rewarded for working hard. So, and I see some people from Indiana, San Francisco, San Diego, love it, love it, love it. Okay, so also in our families, when we talk about being rewarded as a hard worker, I want you to think about what that looked like for you. Were you a person who wasn't necessarily seen in your home life, right? Where working hard at school or excelling at school really helped you stand out and feel seen, right? So we start to really kind of tie in our identity with being a hard worker because it gets us something, right? There's always, out of everything that we do, there's always a pro and a con, right? So let's talk about the pros. So if you grew up as a hard worker, post a comment and let us know, like, what was the pro for you? What did you get out of being a hard worker? If you were growing up and you were excelling in school, what did you get out of that? What did you get? Go ahead and type that into the comments. So we always get something. I know for me, it was, hearing my mother, say, oh, Kristen does this and she's doing that, right? So it's kind of like hearing about this from her. Okay. So Cinnamon says affirmation. Absolutely. We get affirmation through being a hard worker. Okay. And so it makes us want to continue with that. So we've got, Latoya says, got good grades, got to go to her favorite restaurant. Yeah. And having, Cinnamon says, always being othered, it was important to be affirmed. Absolutely. So that's a huge part of this, where when we are feeling like we are the other, and this can happen in so many different ways, right? It can be a person of color. It could be that we are the only, whether that's the only child or the only, the only girl in our family, the only male in our family, the only in our family of any gender. And then in addition to that, it can also be that maybe we are the first. So we could be a first generation. We could be, first generation American or first generation college student. It's really about being that first, maybe the first person to pursue a specific degree or to go to a different school or to live in a specific neighborhood. There are all these ways that we can feel like we are an only, that we have one foot in one world and one foot in a different world. And so sometimes putting your head down and just staying in your books helps you stay away from, being bullied. It helps you stay away from feeling like you're different. It helps you feel this confidence that you are an exceptional person, because sometimes you don't always feel that way. And then we talk about, let's talk about affirmation. So in your home, think about, and definitely feel free to put it in the comment as well, like, think about how else you were told that you were enough. Okay. So did you grow up in a family where your parents or your caretakers actively told you that you were this incredible person? Were your friends telling you that you were amazing, right? Think about that growing up, what that looked like for you, right? So then we enter into the workforce, and we are still like, we are that person who has done all the things. People can depend on you, right? Your parents probably said, oh, okay, just let them do it, right? Kristen, where are you? Come do this for me, right? So you begin to be the person where all these things are placed on you. And then you take that into the workforce. You take that into the workforce where you are the person who gets things done. You get it done. And then more and more people say, oh, let's just hand it to you because you do it really well. You get it done. And then that puts us in a place where two things: we enjoy being counted on. We enjoy having things come to us, but up until a point, right? Up until a point where it becomes overwhelming. It becomes a situation where we are headed to burnout status, where it no longer feels good for doing all the things when you can't even breathe. You don't have time to do anything else, right? Sometimes as hard workers, we may not even know what lights us up, what makes us feel good, or what joy is like for us, because we've always just worked hard. And so then it becomes this situation where it's harder and harder to disconnect yourself from work. It becomes everything that you do. Your identity is around being a hard worker. So go ahead and type in hard worker if this has been your identity. This is something that you have identified with for a really long time in your life. Go ahead and type in hard worker. So it's also, when we talk about disconnecting from work, we also have to add in their boundaries. We got to add in their boundaries, because when you are doing all of the things, what happens is that, your boundaries get skewed. And if we look at startups and organizations like that, right? Startups, nonprofits, small businesses, it's normally a lot of different people doing all of the things, but no one is actually prioritizing the work. They're just doing all the things that need to get done, right? And so that's when you find yourself taking phone calls after work, texting coworkers, you're taking calls from your manager, you're possibly on the weekend as well. You're always thinking about work in some way, shape, or form. And it gets harder and harder to disconnect and to go and do the things that fill you up, if you even know what they are. Okay. So let's also talk about this pressure and responsibility, right? Because that goes hand in hand with being a hard worker, especially if you are a first or an only. Okay. If you're a first or an only, there is this pressure and responsibility where people are saying, if you immigrated to this country, it costs thousands of dollars for you to pay for all of the visas, for the move, all of that. And so it's kind of like, if your parents or your grandparents were here, it's like, look, we sacrificed so much for you to be here. If you went to private school, we sacrificed so much for you to be here. And so it begins this pressure and this responsibility of this sacrifice that you're hearing about, that also adds on to this level of responsibility for you. So now you start doing things because it's expected of you. You've always gotten things done. It's expected of you. So when someone gives you a project, you don't say no. You just continue with it, right? Like, you just add it onto your plate and you add on more and more. And so then sometimes you get to a point where you're like, is this even what I want anymore? Do I really want this anymore? And what do I even want? And it becomes very difficult for you to really distinguish yourself from a hard worker and then what's it like to experience joy and relaxation and to just be able to disconnect and to just be yourself, right? Because sometimes being yourself can be wrapped up in being a hard worker. So then if you are not working, then what do you have? What does that mean for you? Okay. So this also leads us into overthinking, right? So we're overthinking. We will make a decision and then we will think, is this the right one? Did I do the right thing? Should I change it? And so we fall into also this overthinking phase where that's really that pressure to be perfect, to be right. And perfection is a part of this, right? Making mistakes can lend itself to, do you really appreciate this opportunity in front of you? Do you really appreciate this job? What will other people think? Are you embarrassing me? Are you embarrassing the team, the family, right? So you see how all of this comes into play with perfectionism, stress, and then the inability to really be yourself. So in leadership, can you be yourself? Can you lead in the way that you feel comfortable leading with your value system, with knowing your strengths? Or are you leading the way that you think you should be leading? Are you leading the way that other people have led as well? So that brings us to authentic leadership. So do you know your top 5 strengths, right? Do you know them right off the top of your head, right? So most people don't know their top 5 strengths. So if that's you, you really are most people. You may not know what you're really, really good at. So if you would love to know exactly what you were really, really good at, just go ahead and type in strengths into the chat box. Type that in. Type in strengths if you really would love to know the top 5 things that you are really, really great at. Type that into the chat box. Okay. So this is one of the things when we talk about high-level leadership, it's also knowing exactly what you are great at. And I say that word great because a lot of times too, as hard workers, we are uncomfortable with the limelight. We're uncomfortable with celebrating our wins, with telling people what we have done well, what we just accomplished. So we kind of shy away from the spotlight. Behind the scenes is great because you're getting everything done. Like you're accomplishing all these things, but when it comes time to really be in the spotlight or tell people what you've done, that can feel so, so, so uncomfortable for us, right? So if that is you, if you have a hard time celebrating yourself for what you accomplish, I want you to go ahead and type in celebrate into the chat box. And you are not alone. You are definitely not alone. This is really one of those things that makes people really uncomfortable. And sometimes it's even uncomfortable when you're in front of your team and a manager celebrates you. You can feel this your cheeks get hot. You just get all warm inside because you are uncomfortable. You're flushed. You are uncomfortable with being the center of attention. Okay. Because a lot of times for hard workers, we weren't celebrated growing up. You were only celebrated for the work that you did, but not necessarily who you are. And so this brings us to the fact that you are way more than the work that you do. And so it's important to know exactly what your strengths are and what you do better. And so I want to start now with kind of helping you down that path of understanding what you do better than anybody else, right? And even that phrasing might be uncomfortable. So we're going to say what you do really, really well. Okay. So what I want you to do is to think about the thing that really lights you up. Like you could spend all day doing this thing. it really, not only are you really, really great at it, right? But you also feel empowered. You lose track of time and you love it. It fills you up. So the difference is not necessarily like an Instagram where you can spend all day and you've not wasted your time, but you've spent all day on it, right? Let's add into that it fills you up, right? It fills you up and it really makes you feel alive. So type something into the chat box that really, like, you feel that you're great at it, way better than most people, and it fills you up. Okay, so type that in to the chat box, because it's important for us to think about not just, what other people tell us that we are good at, because our strengths, we tend to be blind to our strengths. We tend to think that something that comes easy to us should not be a strength. We think that a strength is something that is super hard, it's super difficult. And so we have a tendency not to see our strengths as something amazing. We see them as, oh, that's just, I don't know. It's almost like, oh, I just poured a glass of milk, or I just, like, it's something simple. And the reality is that your strengths come easy for you. They do. And they should, because they're there for you to use them. It should be easy. It shouldn't be difficult. But a lot of times we get caught up into what people tell us that we're good at, and we may not like that particular thing, right? So even though we're really great at something, you have to pair it with something that fills you up. You got to pair it with something that fills you up, okay? And thinking about that. So when we talk about high-level leadership, we also want to talk about moving from not just the person who gets things done, but also the person who invests their time and energy in the right things. So not doing all of the things, but doing the right things. So I see in the chat box, completing tasks independently. Yes, absolutely. So being able to have autonomy is an incredible, incredible thing, where someone can, what needs to be accomplished, and you can go and do that on your own, right? So no one has to be over top of your shoulder, making sure that you get it done, but you can go. And that is definitely how I work best too, which is you give me something, I am off and running, and I do my best work when I am in my own space and can create on my own, okay? I also see, hey, Mike, I also see I'm good at listening and talking with people and helping them process and validate their feelings. Absolutely. So incredibly important. And a lot of times as a hard worker, so let's start that again. So a lot of times as a hard worker, feelings became detached from the work, right? It was a way to not even think about what we were feeling, but really just moving, being in motion. We could do things and not necessarily have to worry about the loneliness that we may have felt in our space. Okay. So it became just us doing the things, and that can be a very lonely experience. And so it's super important now when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's navigating your emotions, understanding the impact that you have on other people, and understanding your triggers as well. So being more aware of the things that are triggering you, instead of, you know what, let me just head to the computer, cut it on, and start working, right? So we could detach ourselves from what we were really feeling about what it was like to grow up in a family of feeling like an only, or being an only in our environment at work, right? Okay. All right. So let's go back to investing in yourself and in investing in things that are actually going to move the needle forward. So when we talk about high-level leadership, it's not just working hard, but it is, like, you can look at it like this. You start as a person who solves a problem, because as a hard worker, you are an incredible problem solver, okay? So if you can relate to that, to being a problem solver, I want you to type problem solver into the chat box if you can relate to that. Because hard workers are incredible problem solvers, okay? We know how to get things done. We know how to think about 5 million possibilities if something doesn't work out. We can make it happen, okay? We can definitely make it happen. But when you're talking about high-level leadership, it is also not just making one thing happen, but moving from making one thing happen with one person to the organization, right? So solving problems for an entire department, for an entire region, or for an entire organization. So it's really elevating those problem-solving skills into strategic thinking. So how are you engaging your network of people and your community? How are you managing change? How are you leveraging your personal strengths to make that happen as well as your team strengths? So you see that if you don't know what you do really well, it's very difficult to then move that into strategic thinking because you don't know your strengths. You don't know what to rely on. And so when we don't know what we do better than anyone else, we actually end up having self-doubt. And self-doubt is so common as a hard worker. Like we doubt if we made the right decision, if we did the right thing, if we should be doing something else. Are we working hard enough? You know, sometimes we start the day with thinking about what we didn't accomplish instead of what we actually accomplished the day before. So again, going back to being very difficult to celebrate our wins, to celebrate who we are, because we sometimes don't know what that feels like, right? Because we celebrated ourselves through working hard. That was what made us feel good, okay? So when we talk about making an impact in your organization, an impact in your team, it's not just doing all the things, but it's also doing the things that make sense, right? So in the learning and development field, there was one particular organization where we would all go to a conference, but then in addition to that, they would have these magazines, they would have webinars, they would send out newsletters. And during one of the conferences, we kind of talked about it, and none of us really read any of that. We never paid attention to that. We really only looked at this organization for the conference. So when you think about it, it's all these people who are doing all this work, putting together, I don't know if you've ever put together a newsletter, but it takes so much time. And then to think about the fact that people aren't really reading it. So it's energy that's being exhausted on things that don't necessarily have a return on your investment or your ROI, right? So it's thinking about in a strategic manner, if you are really exerting energy in the right places and spaces, okay? And that means, are you setting aside time during the day, during the week, at least once a week, to really think about strategy? Do you have a dedicated time to think about strategy? So in the chat box, I want you to say a yes or a no if you have a dedicated time to think about strategy, okay? Because that is super, super important for high-level leadership is dedicating time. And normally it has to be away from your workspace. So it could mean going to a coffee shop. It could mean finding a co-working space where you can really just be in your own energy and think about how to create an impact, how to really look at your strategic problem solving skills, but elevating them to the next level by thinking about funneling your energy towards the things that really are going to make a difference in your team, in your organization, okay? All right, so we've got a question here. So if we know our strengths, then we should recognize others and being able to delegate to others that can be empowered as well. Absolutely, yes, right? So if you know your strengths, the next thing is to make sure that you know your team strengths, okay? So you know what everybody does well, so that what happens is thinking about things that it's not just, don't be the type of leader that just pushes off things that you don't like. It's a little bit more. So again, we're talking about being strategic with this, which is finding out what people love to do, what fills them up. And so if you hate spreadsheets, but someone on your team absolutely loves them, then why are you doing them? You should definitely be delegating it to the person where that fills them up. Okay. So that is a difference. It's not just delegating to delegate, but also delegating according to people's strengths. So when we are working in our strengths, we are completely filled up. It makes the time go faster. It's easier. We feel lighter. And so when you have a team that is lighter, that feels more confident, that's happy, then you actually accomplish a lot more, but it feels much lighter. It feels better. It feels more joyful. And so that is really, it's pairing strategic problem solving also with confidence, because when you know what you do really, really well, then you can also feel really great about being given more work that is in your zone of genius. Okay. All right. So yeah. And so I think that some people are saying, like, no, they don't. They find it hard to make the time. And a lot of this comes down from doing all of the things, especially when you pair that with, other responsibilities, the personal responsibilities that you have in your life, whether it is through your family, your friends, other responsibilities that you might have outside of work, in terms of organizations that you might have joined, different things. It can be hard to find the time. So what I'm saying is you've got to be strategic and put it on your calendar ahead of time. So that means, starting now, you could start a month from now when your calendar is a lot less likely to be packed. You start a month from now, you put that dedicated time, whether it's 20, 30 minutes or an hour, of really thinking about strategy for the next week. Okay. Putting that down so it's dedicated time that you don't move, that you also talk with your manager about it, and that you all talk about a dedicated time for you to really think about the strategy so that you can move not only what your manager thinks is important forward, but also the organization, because you're pairing those things together. You're having a conversation with your manager about what's important to them in terms of your role, and you're pairing that with what's important for the organization to move forward. So it's in everybody's best interest for you to really have that time to think strategically. Okay. All right. So when you know exactly what you do well, then you can have more confidence in your leadership, and you can also lead more authentically. Okay. So knowing how you lead is so important, because what works for someone else may not work for me. And I definitely learned that the hard way, where, a lot of times we start to mimic people around us, whether that is in the leadership world or the business world. Like, you start to mimic what you think is successful. And then you find out quickly that what you think is successful for that other person may not work for you. So it's really important for you to find out what feels right for you. What feels right for you? Even having a feedback conversation, someone may tell you how to do it, but how does it really feel for you to do it? Right? And what is a way that you can do it that feels good for you? Okay. And so that's what authentic leadership is. It is really pairing your confidence, your clarity, all of that with your strengths, what you do well. And it's also your values, because what happens is that when we are doing something just because someone else wants us to do it, it starts to drain us. It starts to feel very, very uncomfortable. And so authentic leadership is really maximizing your strengths, what you do better, what fills you up, what feels right to you, your value system, and your capacity. Because capacity is super important in high-level leadership. It's understanding what you just don't have the capacity for. Okay. Instead of doing all the things, you are now understanding that sometimes you have to say no because you just don't have the capacity. When we do 100 things, you can't do any of them really well. So you start making mistakes. It starts not feeling like it is fully your work because you don't have the time to do that, right? Yeah, Lisa, I hear you. She says, "I needed your knowledge in the past." Very insightful. Yes, it's wonderful if we can all start off with knowing this in leadership because it would make us much more effective leaders and our teams much more effective as well, right? But capacity is really one of the words that is so important for you to start to learn because in addition to that, it's paired with boundaries. It's paired with having to say no. And ultimately, we are learning to say no because number one, it's about capacity. We want to continue to do the work that we love. We want to do it really well. But in addition to that, we want to make time for the people and the things that we love. And a part of leadership is taking breaks, right? Most hard workers have so many days of PTO that they have not taken. Why? Because sometimes we're afraid to. We're afraid to take that PTO because especially if you're in an environment with other hard workers, what will they say? Because they're so used to just working hard, right? And so one thing I will tell you is that my best ideas always came from my downtime. They came from me either meditating, they came from me being on vacation and having so much more brain space to think about things, or they came from being with other people in brainstorming, right? All of that requires you to have space so that you can expand new ideas, right? And you can also expand personally. And so that's super important to actually take that space. And one of the things that I do partner with people on is learning how to take more vacation and learning how to take more time for yourself because it is essential. It's essential because otherwise we just burn out on all ends, the personal front, the professional front. It's like sometimes we feel like we don't want to get up when we are completely burned out. And a lot of that comes from being at capacity, not saying no to things, and not making time for you to be in your own energy, not your family, not your friends, not work, but just your own energy where you can do what you want to do. There's no responsibility in there, right? You can go where you want to go. You can do what you want to do. You can think what you want to think. So making that time to just be in your own space. Okay. So the last thing we're going to talk about is we're going to loop this back to investment. And a high level leader, their mindset about investment is very different from the doer or the super doer. Okay. Investment really comes down to also investing in yourself, because as a hard worker, as a doer, as a super doer, you're normally doing things for others constantly, but not really thinking about investing in yourself. And so as you're moving into higher level leadership, it's really about investing in you. It's investing in you. And so that takes time, that might take, money, but it's really about understanding what's going to take you to that next level. And so the difference is that somebody who is, in senior leadership or high level leadership, most of the time they have an executive coach that they are working with or a leadership coach that they are working with, because that is that person that is helping them to navigate change, to manage change, to think about strategy, to, have a self-care routine, to manage your emotions. All of those things that a lot of times what happens is that we want to do something, but we may not know how. And it's actually taking it to the next level to be around people or a person that really is able to guide you and partner with you to get you where you want to go. We can only get to where we want to go by ourselves up to a certain point. And then it requires somebody with more experience, more skills to really help you do that. So even as a coach, I invest in my own personal coaching, right? I invest because I know that there's certain things that I am also going to need help with. So investment is important. And I will tell you the difference is like a doer might think like it's like going to a restaurant. And I know some of you all can relate to this. You go to a restaurant and let's say you order shrimp and grits. And your friend says, well, how many shrimp do I really get in that dish? But yet for you, you're thinking about, is this going to be an amazing experience? Am I going to love this? Is this going to be something new? Is this going to be something that I can be like, oh my goodness, I had the best shrimp and grits at this restaurant? So we're talking about experiences versus checking it off the list. Okay. So in thinking small versus having an expansive mindset, dealing with experiences. Okay. So that is also something that's slightly different when you move into high level leadership. It's really about the experiences that you have, the information that you have, and learning from other people is also a part of investing in yourself, especially in a community, right? That's why you will have a lot of times where people will have masterminds, or they will do, they will have 2 or 3 people that they talk to all the time that they run ideas past, because it's also it's also about the other people, okay, that are also investing in your ideas and telling you, oh my goodness, that was amazing, and helping you celebrate what you do. Okay. All right. So I hope that that was really helpful for you all. I hope that that was really helpful. If you are a leader of color who is interested in going to the next level, that high level leadership, and you're interested in talking with me about a program that I am offering, go ahead and type in program into the chat box. If you are not a leader of color, and you're still interested in talking about coaching, definitely go ahead and type coach into the chat box, and I will make sure that I get you the information for both, whether you are a leader of color heading to the next level, or you are somebody who really just wants to also head to that next level and you want to work with me individually. I do have a few spots that are open as well. So you'll type in coach for that. And I hope that you all have really gotten a lot out of today. I would love for you all to type into the chat box what you actually like. What's one takeaway? What's one aha moment that you have? I want you to go ahead and type that into the chat box. Okay. And so thank you all for investing in yourselves today, for really investing in your learning, for helping me expand you as a leader and to become more aware of who you are. And we will definitely be doing more lives. And I want to thank you all so much. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.